Welcome back to another episode of the CSK8 podcast. My name is Jared O'Leary. In this week's episode, I am interviewing Brenda Bass. Now, Brenda is actually a coworker of mine at Boot Up. In this interview, you're going to hear us talk about some advice for educators who are interested in getting started with robotics or physical computing, as well as some considerations around equity and access, how to learn more about robotics and CS if you don't have a degree in either of them, and much more. As always, you can find the show notes for this episode by clicking the description in the app that you are listening to this on, or by visiting jaredoleary.com. In this particular show notes, there are links to a bunch of robotics competitions and resources and devices and whatnot, so make sure you check those out. With that being said, we're now going to start with an introduction by Brenda.
Hello, my name is Brenda Bass, and I am a professional development facilitator for Boot Up. I was a public educator for 32 years. I taught first grade, fifth grade, and sixth grade. I was a computer technology application skills for 16 years, a curriculum technologist, library media specialist, and digital learning specialist, where I facilitated technology professional development for multiple campuses and helped teachers integrate technology in their curriculum. My last year, I was in the STEAM lab before I retired. I retired from teaching in June of 2018 and have been with Boot Up full-time for about a year and a half, and I consulted with them before going full-time.
So if you were to write a book about your CS education journey, what would the titles of the chapters be?
Chapter 1, Real-Time Introduction to CS Education. Chapter 2, Fun and Engaging Learning. Chapter 3, Provide Experiences with Authentic Audiences. Chapter 4, Approachable Teaching. And Chapter 5, Continue Learning and Growing.
So what are some of the things that you learned in each of those chapters? Are there any particular moments that kind of were a catalyst for moving into the next chapter? And if so, what did you learn through that?
Chapter 1, Real-Time Introduction to CS. My takeaway is you do not have to know everything about teaching CS, as you can learn alongside with students, which models and promotes a lifelong learning. Chapter 2, Fun and Engaging. I think my takeaway on that would be to always look for fun and engaging ways to teach the basics. One example comes to mind, and you'll probably laugh because you're not this old. But when I first started teaching keyboard, that was before Mario Teaches Typing and all those cool typing programs. So I would dress up in a black graduation gown, and I was Professor Offie, AWFE, which just stood for posture. Watch your arms, your wrist, your feet, make sure your eyes are on your document. And sometimes I would be known to stand on tables, and I would call out letters. A, and the students would type. A, and echo. Of course, all the teachers around me would close their doors because my room was not. We would also have, time typing tests, which I guess are probably pretty much a no-no now. But I would even sit down and type with the students. So I think just looking for fun and, engaging ways, even just to teach those basics. Chapter 3, Provide Experiences with Authentic Audiences. I always tried to look for ways students could showcase their work. My students were always entered into district, area, regional, state, and even international competitions. They won at each of these levels. I remember one competition, this was a long time ago. It was called Cyber Safari. And I had a group of students that would come after school, and they were given these clues, and they would have to go to certain websites and look for these clues. And whenever they thought they found the right answer, when they clicked on it, it would show like a treasure chest, and they had to register it. Well, we ended up winning first in that one year, so that was pretty cool. Chapter 4, Approachable Teaching. Make connections with your students and be there in the moment for them. You never really know the impact you're going to have on someone at that time. And then Chapter 5, Continue Learning and Growing. Continue on being that lifelong learner. This is where Boot Up fits in. It allows me to go all over and impact a larger community than I was doing just in the school.
Yeah, your Chapter 2, the fun and engaging, or however you phrased it, that definitely resonates with me. So when I used to teach general music classes at elementary school, we were forced to teach lesson plans in a specific order, like even on specific weeks. Like every elementary school in the district, all 50 plus of them, had to teach the exact same thing every week. And it was very limiting. And so Like we had an entire unit where it was all about folk dances, and we were supposed to spend an entire 30-minute class like learning one or two folk dances, but I could teach it in as quick as like 5 minutes. So it was like, okay, what are we supposed to do with the remaining time? We're supposed to do this dance over and over. How can we make it fun and engaging? So I'd be like, all right, now we're going to do this dance, but we're all going to be dinosaurs. What would a dinosaur move like when doing this dance? Or what would you do if you were a middle schooler and they'd like move all slow and zombie-like, and like just like things like that. So that definitely resonates with me. Finding, okay, we have to do this thing, and this thing is not very fun, but let's find an interesting way to make it engaging for everybody involved, because we have to do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the dinosaur and walk like a middle schooler in slow-mo. That's funny.
And it was also for me, because like if I had to spend an entire month doing the same thing and I was bored with it, like then kids aren't going to have fun in the class. So, okay, how can I make this entertaining for myself and for the kids?
Right. Great idea.
So can you tell me a story about an experience in your time in education that continues to impact you?
I had a high school English teacher my junior and senior year that she would always have one-on-one conversations with each of her students just to check in with us, just to see how we were, if we needed help with anything, or just to talk. I remember one of my last visit with her, it was before graduation, my senior year. She kind of asked me what my plans were. She told me she thought I would make a great teacher. I laughed because I wanted to be a graphic artist. But during my sophomore year of college, I kind of started doubting that path I was going on. And I kept remembering what Mrs. Hallwick said, about being a teacher. I changed my major and really never looked back. When I retired, my best friend got letters from my former students and colleagues and videos and put them together in a slideshow. Being a positive role model, always having a smile, which was not always easy as a teacher, as you know, but being a champion for students, providing experiences were all a theme across these letters and videos. You never really know what influence or impact you have on others, but I knew I had a high school teacher that believed in me, and I always wanted to have that same impact on others around me.
What are some things that you wish you know when you first started teaching CSR coding?
I started teaching middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th. I did a multimedia class and a web design, and those students needed something else. So I started Scratch, and I wish there was a manual or a guide to, that teaching Scratch or CS coding at the time, because we just kind of had to learn it. Actually, they probably taught me as much as I taught them. We kind of learned together in the moment.
Yeah, nowadays it's the opposite problem
Yes, too much.
in terms of like there's just too much, like too many platforms, too many guides, too many things to learn from. So kind of filtering or curating for new teachers is definitely necessary. So what about something related to education that you're really good at or maybe knowledgeable of that most people don't know about you, whether it comes to what you are currently doing with PD facilitating or when you were in the classroom?
Well, I'm pretty good at computers and technology, but that's not always been the case. When I first started in the computer lab, I didn't even know how to turn on a computer. I remember one Friday, the computer technologist told me that she was going to retire. And I thought, I want that job. So I went home and I told my husband, I said, you need to teach me everything I need to know about computers because I have an interview with the director of technology on Monday. And he said, you can't even turn one on. I said, I know, we got to get busy. And we had an Apple IIe at the time. Now that was state of the art technology back then. I guess people are amazed that I really didn't even know how to turn on a computer.
It's amazing how much stuff has changed since then in terms of like just the technological advances that we've made in the last couple of decades.
Well, you'll laugh at this. I had a mixed lab. I had the 2Es, and then we had Macintoshes, and then we moved to the PC. So I kind of had a plethora of technology. So we kind of did stations. All right, you're going to be on the Apple IIe this day. You're going to be on this the next day. And I had the dial-up modem. And so, but I was bound and determined I was going to teach internet skills and internet safety to these kiddos. And so I used a program called Web Whacker. And I would have to figure out what website and how many layers deep I would need to go. And I would whack that website. And then I would put it on our server and they would access it that way. And it was kind of like they were on the internet.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it was essentially taking like a carbon copy of each web page?
Yes. And if you didn't whack it deep enough, when you clicked on the link, it just wouldn't go anywhere.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So how do you go from not knowing how to turn on the computer to now being a professional development facilitator? Like, how did you develop that expertise?
To be a technologist, I had to take a lot of clock hours. I think I had to have 130 clock hours. So I would go take all these classes, but I think I was probably a lot like the student you were, Jared, because I would be the one that would sit in the back of the class. I'd kind of listen, but I would explore and do my own thing
Yeah.
because they moved way too slow for me. And so, just sitting there, hands on. I collaborated with others. YouTube was huge, and how do you do this? But I always had this mindset that a computer was not going to beat me. And I remember there was one of my colleagues, he was at another elementary school, but he would write these articles of projects students could do. And then I was the guinea pig. I would have my students try it.
So how did you go from working with computers to getting into robotics? Because again, you're going from like not feeling comfortable or even knowledgeable of how to turn on a computer to now you're actually like building robots that compete.
When I was in the computer lab, I decided to start a robotics club just to provide a different opportunity for our students that was different, but I knew that they would benefit from it. So I looked for different opportunities for them to participate. In Texas, we have our Texas Computer Education Association had sponsored some robotics contests. So we entered those. And so I wrote some grants, and then PTA matched funding to purchase the Lego Mindstorm. Now, these are the RCX kits. So these are the older kits. They had the yellow brick, and you had to have a Bluetooth tower, and that's how you downloaded your program onto your robot. And then you had to go run it, and then you had to come back and make tweaks and plug it back in. One year, the topic was to create something that helps solve a problem. So I had one group of students that created an automatic dog feeder, and they built a tower and out of Legos, and they used a cardboard chute and a plastic boat. So every time their robot would hit this tower, it would dispense the perfect amount of dog food. Well, they ended up winning second place in the state of Texas. Now, this was 3 boys, and this was the year that the school that I was at was going to close. And so the principal and everybody decided that I needed to actually take these boys to Austin, which was about 400 miles away, to the awards banquet. Now, these boys had never been out of Lubbock. They've never been on an airplane, much less ridden in a taxi or any of that. So they've never been at a banquet. They had to wear dress up clothes. I'm like, okay, start with the silverware on the outside and work in, put your napkin in your lap. But, being an educator, I thought it was my duty to take them to the Capitol when we were in Austin. And I thought they would be so impressed. They were. They were so impressed that there was a Ferrari parked out in front of it. So they were drooling. And I'm thinking, oh, how am I going to get their picture? So finally I said, okay, stand in front of the car. So I got them, the car, and the Capitol and the picture.
On a previous Unpacking Scholarship episode, I talk about how what's intended to be learned in a curriculum is often different than what's taught, which is often different from what students embody. And that is like a perfect example of you intended for them to really appreciate the Capitol, but what was embodied was the Ferrari.
Yeah.
What do you wish more educators understood about getting into robotics or physical computing at large?
I think the biggest thing is you don't need to know everything about them. You can learn alongside the students, and that is very, very powerful. Start small and try one thing, then add little by little as you build your program. There's so many different robots and devices out there. I would suggest choosing something that your students will get the most out of and will help you stretch your budget.
Yeah, that idea of you don't need to know everything right away. Like the imposter syndrome is real, and I definitely felt it when I went into CS because there's like all my degrees are in music education, and here I am in this field. Like I was like, I hope nobody figures out that I don't have a degree in computer science, but like most of the people that I talk to who are in CS education don't have a background in CS. And even if they do, it's not like they're holding it against anybody. It's okay to learn I mean, it's almost necessary in this field in particular. You just have to constantly be learning, and you're always going to be like, well, I don't know that yet. Let me learn it.
Yeah, and that's what I would always say. I would say, well, let me go ask my best friend Google and YouTube. I'll get back to you.
So think about like hypothetically what an ideal robotics or physical computing like program would be at a school. What would you have in it if you were to design it, and how would kids engage in that program?
My ideal robotics program would not be a club after school with limiting the number of students, but have it to be part of the day, either as like a STEM or STEAM lab or a science lab or library or even its own class. One of my most frustrating things was with the robotics club, I would have over 100 applications, but I could only take 25 or 30 students because that's all the devices and the computers we had for them. So that was very frustrating. But by having it part of the day, this allows for all students to engage in the program.
Right.
Have different devices at each grade level. So maybe kindergarten, maybe they use the Go mouse, and then first grade, they use the Bebot. And maybe they're just learning just to demonstrate simple algorithms, the dash for second and third. And then fourth and fifth, maybe use like the Sphero or the Lego Mindstorm EV3s. But have different challenges for students, and even have students create challenges for each other. Also encourage other students to try to come up with solutions to real world problems, kind of such as that automatic dog feeder.
Right.
Campus level, district level, and state level competitions, and, have fun.
And how did you, from like an equity standpoint and wanting to be inclusive and whatnot, how did you narrow it down from 100 plus applicants to the 25 that you could have in your class?
I finally come up with a rubric because I could not figure out another way to do it that was fair. And so it was just weighted areas. And then I did get some feedback from their teachers and stuff. And then they also had to write like a little paragraph why they wanted to be in it and stuff. I was not necessarily looking for, did they start it with a capital letter? Did they read the application? Did they follow directions? More like with that. But yeah, that was the hardest thing. I could have had a club every day but the problem is when you start building these robots and stuff, you have to leave them for the next time and just didn't have enough equipment.
Yeah, that was a problem in not only the coding classes, but like just like the makerspace that I had. It was okay, but what about the next class? Now we got to take this thing apart, and then a new class has to put it together. And then if you're having to rebuild and tear down, that just takes up time. And if you only have like 40 minutes or an hour, it's just not enough.
Whenever I left the STEAM lab, I had written a lot of grants, and so I had a lot of different equipment. I think I had probably 20 EV3 kits when I left, and we had like 12 dashes and 12 dots and all this stuff. So the guy that took my place, he said, man, you left me in a great position. But they've been able to include all that stuff. So each grade level does kind of something different. And so that's been nice.
So your previous answer, how would you take what you said into consideration with, like, let's say you had a colleague who came up to you and was like, hey, I want to start robotics at my school. And you had mentioned you would want it to be an in-school program. What would you recommend for them to get started with that? So it's not just an after school, and so it's not excluding kids.
What I would do is I would start small by writing grants. If the district allows, you could do donors choose. If you have an active PTA, PTO, ask them to match grants or help them to purchase robots. But while you're building up your robots, your program, start with centers and do a rotation. But make sure you rotate all students throughout the stations until you built up all that equipment for the entire class.
So, in speaking of equipment, what like resources or tools or even questions would you recommend for either an educator and even an administrator who wants to get started with this in their school?
If you're starting a robotics club after school, think through how you will recruit and how you'll get the word out. What grade levels would it include? How many computers or devices and robots do you have? How will students apply? How will you determine which applicants are chosen? I would recommend not trying to reinvent the wheel. Check with other districts, campuses to see what they're doing. There's lots of resources out there, such as Wonder Workshop has a robotics competition, the Scratch community. There's also the Sphero Global Challenge. Boot Up PD has free curriculum and resources. Code .org and CSTA.
Yeah, so that kind of answered what my next question would be is, like, what would you recommend in terms of resources, questions, platforms, whatever, for not just physical computing, but CS program at large?
Yeah, one of the things too, would each grade level look the same? If it's physical computing will be used, what robots would you use at each grade level, or will it be the same? Something else is, how will you address digital citizenship? Because that definitely needs to be thrown out there. But then the resources would work for a CS program as well as a robotics coding club.
Yeah, digital citizenship is one of those things where even if you don't address it, it's going to come up.
Exactly.
So I'm fascinated with how people kind of learn and improve themselves. So I'm wondering, how do you practice or iterate on your abilities as an educator? And this could be like now as a PD facilitator, or thinking back when you were in the classroom.
I still volunteer as much as I can with coding clubs in the district where I last taught at. I collaborate with others. I try to read and stay up to date on the latest and greatest out there. I attend webinars and conferences, continually create Scratch and Scratch Junior projects. And that's either for our district or even just kind of for fun now too.
So with all that you're doing and have done, and for how long you've had a career in education, what have you done or continue to do to kind of stave off burnout?
I've never been very good at this one. I tend to be a workaholic. My mind goes nonstop at the things to try or things to code. I'm just now learning how to end my day and try not to check work email until the next morning. That's not always the case, but I try. I usually try to go for a walk before beginning work, or I usually know that that's not going to happen. I always have good intentions, but I think, if I could just work a little bit longer. I have been, since I've been home, eating lunch outside in the backyard as the weather permits, for a nice break. Setting timers, working like 50 minutes and taking a 10-minute break is helpful. I'm not always great at doing that, but I try. I am getting better about making sure I eat lunch. Before, it'd be like 3:00 and it's like, I'm hungry. Oh, wait, I haven't had lunch. So I am getting better about doing that.
Yeah, that's all very relatable to me. Yeah, I have to remind myself to stop working. I'm telling you, you should really try the answer and respond to emails only twice a day and just taking it off the phone. It has helped me out a lot.
I have started closing the tab with my email so it doesn't just pop up, but I do get it on my watch. I do get it on my phone. So I probably need to just take that off too.
Yeah, just try a week. Free yourself. Are there any questions that I have not asked that you want to discuss?
You kind of sort of addressed this. The one that kind of come to mind is, do I have a computer science certification? Absolutely not. My certification is 1st through 8 elementary self-contained. You'll laugh at this. 1st through 8 art, early childhood through 12 technology applications, and then I was EC through 12 master teacher certification. Now in Texas, or at least they used to only have a computer science certification for 8 through 12. But my first elementary self-contained was sufficient enough because I could include science and math. I could teach that.
Right.
So no, I didn't have a formal CS background, but just learned it as we went.
Yeah, I wish more people knew that about CS education. It doesn't need to be as scary as some people make it out to be. So what do you wish there's more research on that could inform your own practices?
One of the questions I get frequently from districts, if there's a correlation with CS coding and improved state testing. It's fun to see in the districts that we've been in for multiple years what their students are doing and how it's getting easier for them. And teachers are recognizing, hey, they already know how to do this, so we can kind of go a little bit deeper. So teachers are seeing skills like problem solving and debugging carrying over to other subjects, especially math. So that's been pretty exciting.
Yeah, my former superintendent, Dr. Betsy Hargrove in Avondale, she says that they haven't done an official study or anything, but the teachers have noticed changes, the administrators have noticed changes, she's noticed changes. Like, she thinks that there's a direct link to it. And I was recently on a webinar, I think it was with Robin Hood Foundation. They were talking about how they actually now have some empirical data that says there is some kind of corollary between engaging in computational thinking or coding or CS and improvement in other test score areas. I forget if it was ELA test scores and math or if it's just one or the other, but I'll see if I can find a link to that and include it in the show notes.
Yeah, I would like to see that.
Do you have any questions for myself or the field?
My question would be, if a district could only purchase one type of robot, what would be your recommendation? And this would be like for kindergarten through fifth.
Honestly, I know I'm biased because Katie Henry works at Microbit, but I'd probably go with Microbit because it's very robust in terms of the amount of things that it can do at very low cost, and it integrates with Scratch. Like, there's just so much that you can do with that little device, much more capabilities than even devices that are like twice the cost of it. So I'd probably recommend that, and that one can be used probably as young as second grade and do pretty well with it. For the earlier kids, I'm not sure. I'm hesitant when it comes to recommending physical devices and robots in particular, because it's such a closed platform where I feel like there's not much else you can do outside of what has been intentionally designed into robots in particular for like the K2 grade levels.
Yeah, I like the microbits as well. The only thing I was telling McKay, we were talking about microbits the other day, is for one of my districts, I had them purchase a kit that had like the alligator clips and the LED lights and stuff. So it just made it a little bit more versatile, and but it wasn't that much more in terms of cost. So it made it where they could do a lot more with it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I also really appreciate about Microbit is it's not just this self-contained thing. Like, there are, I believe, hundreds of potential accessories that you can use with it. Granted, they don't all work with like Scratch or anything like that, but they do work with like MakeCode, which is Microsoft's, I believe, language.
Yeah, it had that MakeCode has a Python editor, and then the MakeCode editor, I think is what it's called. So, which is like the block-based coding, like what we use with Scratch and Scratch Junior.
So I'm curious, do you have any suggestions on how this podcast, like the CSK podcast, could better serve the CS education community?
Personally, I've enjoyed and gained a great deal from these podcasts. I know that they're on all major podcast directories, but I'm wondering if we could reach out to ISTE or other international organizations that could just help us get the word out so it could reach more people, across the world.
Yeah, if anyone from ISTE or CSTA is listening and wants to share it, please feel free to do so. I give permission. Where could people go to connect with you and the organizations that you work with?
I'm on Twitter at Brenda Bass 63, bootuppd.org, and be sure to follow Boot Up on Twitter and Facebook.
And with that, that concludes this week's episode of the CSK8 podcast. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Brenda. She has been an excellent coworker to work with over the last couple of years at Boot Up. As a friendly reminder, you can find all of the links to various robots and physical computing platforms and whatnot that were mentioned in the show just by visiting jaredoleary.com or clicking the link in the show notes. Stay tuned next week for another episode where I will unpack some scholarship, and 2 weeks from now where I will have another interview. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you consider sharing this with somebody who might be interested in learning more about robotics and physical computing. Hope you're all having a wonderful week, and I will talk to you later.